thanks, Dan. Okay, let's call this meeting to order. Let's check and see if all the trustees are connected. Terry,
Yes.
Celeste,
Yes.
Rusty,
Yes, sir.
Bo,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
and Keith.
Yes.
Okay, real good. We need to approve our agenda. There's a motion on page 2 of the agenda packet. Is there a motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make the following motion that that the Board of Education approve the agenda as printed.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Thank you very much. And this is a roll call. So Terry,
Yes.
Celeste,
Yes.
Rusty,
Yes, sir.
Bo,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
and Keith.
Yes.
Oh, and Randy, yes. The motion passes. We'll move forward with our agenda as presented. And there are no comments or communications from citizens. Are there any comments from trustees? Okay, we'll move right to the heart of our meeting, our discussion items, and I'll turn it over to Gary.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be with you once again, albeit virtually, but I'm excited that we are meeting to once again work on policy governance matters for Portage Public Schools. We have 3 items on our agenda today in terms of the discussion items we're going to be working on. We're going to do some quick introductions. We're going to do a review of the social media policies that have been put forth from the policy committee. And we're going to spend most of our meeting talking about ends development. Having said that, we're going to follow a format very similar to what we have done in person, which is that we'll go to approximately 5 o'clock, where there's a natural break in the conversation. I'm going to ask for a break at 5. We'll take a 15-minute break. We'll come back 15 minutes later, approximately 5:15, and we will go till 6:15. So with the acceptance of all, that's the path that we will follow today. Randy had asked me to prepare perhaps a what you would call icebreakers. If you're thinking of icebreaker in a negative way because it's cold outside, I'm sorry, but it's really an icebreaker. So I'm going to try to share my screen now here. If I can put my screen up, I am going to try to do that here. So let me see what I've got here. You should see right now on your screen the 2 questions I have chosen for our introductions today. The first question that I've chosen for you is, what is important to you about Portage Public Schools and why do you care? And what contributions do you make to the board? Now, I've picked these questions deliberately because I know for those of you who have been on the board for a long period of time, you know this of each other. But really with Keith joining, that it's really going to be very helpful, I think, for you to share some of that personal part of you about why you're so passionately invested in Portage Public Schools, and then what contributions that you are typically making at the board level. That could include your committee assignments, etc. Having said that, I have randomly drawn names in order here. So while you are looking at the questions right now, I'm going to give Terry, who's going to kick us off here, another minute before she starts. Terry will be followed by Bo, Rusty, Celeste, Kurt, Randy, and Keith in that order here. So once again, I'll give you about 1 minute to look at those 2 questions, and I'll reconvene with you here in a minute. So take a look at those. Think about what your answers would be to the 2 questions. What is important to you about Portage Public Schools and why do you care? And what contributions do you make to the board? All righty, asking for you to keep your comments to about 3 minutes. I will turn to Terry. Terry, if you'd kick us off, please.
Okay. So the first question, why is it important to you? What is important to you about Portage Schools and why do you care? What is important to me about Portage Schools is that the schools are a huge part of the community. And if we have good schools, that makes for a good community. My children had a great experience at Portage schools. I want all kids to have that experience. What contributions do I make to the board? I have a couple of unique things that I bring to the board that I think other people maybe do not. One is that I have been a longtime volunteer in Portage schools, starting when my daughter was in kindergarten, and that was 30 years ago. I had a whole list of things that I listed when I put my application in for a board seat, and it's pretty lengthy, so I won't tell you what all those were, but some of them were things as simple as being the room parent, or volunteering in the library, or being the enrichment coordinator at my child's elementary school, all the way up to being a team parent on sports teams, the PTO president at Portage Northern, some of those kinds of things that bring some experience as far as the larger school community, but also relationships with teachers, other parents, and so forth. For about 10 years, I have been the volunteer coordinator for a mentorship program at Portage Northern for at-risk kids. And that means I find the volunteers to do it, and then I help administer that program with the help of a teacher or administrator in that building. I have had 3 students myself that I have worked with. 2 of them are Western students. One's about ready to graduate. The other one is a junior at Western, and one of them is still in high school. That gives me a window on that perspective too, the at-risk kid, whether it's because they live in poverty or whether it's because they have learning challenges. And then a third thing I bring to the board is history in the community. I've lived in Portage for 42 years. Over that course of time, I've been a part of lots of organizations, churches, boards, all kinds of things. And I take particular interest in what's going on in the community, the history of the community. And I do have a rather gift for remembering details about a lot of that stuff. So those are the contributions that I make. I am on the facilities committee. Remind me what my committees are, Randy.
Linkage.
Facilities and the owner linkage committee are the 2 main ones that I participate in. And owner linkage actually brings in some of those contributions that I talked about. So that's me.
Wonderful, Terry. Thanks for sharing. It's fun to watch the expressions of the other board members, Terry. I don't know if you were watching them when you were talking, because you could see when they were like really understanding what you were getting at. So that's good. Next up is going to be Bo. On deck will be Rusty. Bo.
My question to Terry is, Terry, did Gary tip you off on these questions so you could prepare that answer, or were you just going off the cuff?
No, I was going off the cuff. I wrote some notes in the 1 minute he gave me. So.
Oh, goodness.
That's it.
I'm pretty impressed. I am not that fast on my feet, but here goes. So what is important to me about Portage Public Schools? Why do I care? It's an incredibly important and I think effective institution, and it makes this community a better place to live. And it is the reason that we bought a house. I mean, my north side fence is a school district boundary. And there's a reason that I live on the side of it that I do. I wanted the school district. My wife and I wanted the school district. Contributions that I make to the board, a focus, try to keep a focus on the big picture. As you all, except maybe for Keith, knows, I try to figure out ways to encourage performance at higher levels. And over the years, you've sat in these policy governance retreats and you've just seen me like not give up the ghost on 1.1. And I mean, it seems like, I think 1.1 is in a pretty good spot, but I just kind of kept chewing on the bone for years and years. And, we try to figure out language to get in there to kind of point us to a higher place. I mean, and we're already at a high place. So, trying to figure out how to put an improvement mentality in. And then third, it's kind of playing by the policy governance rules. And so those have, I mean, over the years become pretty important to me. And so I kind of see myself as a kind of a keeper of the model, because if we don't all agree to play by it, we won't. So Gary, that's it.
Thank you, Bo. You did just fine. Rusty's next. Celeste's on deck.
All right. Well, I'm not as detailed as Bo and Terry, nor as eloquent. So I'll just start with, if people know me, I do have passions for people. I was talking to Randy about this the other day when Randy stopped by my office, and it's important to me that we empower people, to be their best. That's what we do at my organization. And so when I'm at Portage Public Schools, it's my goal is to assure that Portage Public Schools is empowering, kids and providing them diverse opportunities and encouragement. And actually, the same for staff. It's our duty to make sure PPS is providing our staff the tools they need to empower kids. So I'm all about empowerment, and providing opportunities and encouragement. I guess that's what's important to me, and why I care is empowerment, and I want what's best for people. What contributions do I make? Well, I think it's, I think all board members make. It's our job, and my job is to help guide admin on what we think this community wants and needs. And so, it's just a lot of nudging, just to assure that, our community is getting what they expect. It's also my job, or our job is to inform the community. So it's our job to inform admin, what we think, but it's also our job to inform the community as, what's going on and our methods at PPS and what we're trying to accomplish, because sometimes the community doesn't really understand. So I think it's just, guidance and administration, providing guidance and administration to admin, and providing guidance and administration to the community. So that's it for me, Gary.
Thank you, Rusty. I appreciate your eloquence. Celeste is next. Kurt, you're on deck.
Okay. What is important to me? I also took a couple of notes, and perhaps the primary is that I'm very passionate about, and it's very important to me, for student success on all levels, not just academic, but social, emotional, and all of those pieces. And why do I care? Because that's our investment for the future. We talk about how it impacts the community and that kind of thing, but students, when they are successful, we will see them impact beyond our community. So the more we put into it, the better we're going to achieve that. Contributions, I would like to think that I add a diverse perspective to the board. And as I said, when I first became a member of the board, I can't unknow what I know. So I have been a classroom teacher and administrator, and I'm a parent, have been a parent, still a grandparent of a student. So it's critical that we look at perspectives from each one of those groups. And so I think my contribution is that I know what it means, and I know how it feels when edicts are placed upon teachers and administrators, and how to make that work and how to make it happen. So I tend to look at what are those steps that a teacher would have to go through, what are the steps that an administrator would have to go through to achieve what it is that the board asks of them. So that's it.
Thank you, Celeste. Next will be Kurt. Randy, you're on deck.
Well, thanks. I guess I'm here for the kids, and that would be my first priority. And why do I care? I guess is, this district was really good for my three boys when we started here. I mean, we started on in the KPS, and we moved a couple blocks south 22, 23 years ago when my oldest son was starting 7th grade. So I've seen both districts, and very supportive of both districts, but we're, I'm really here to help the kids if I can help. Appreciated that, 6 years ago I was asked to be on the board, and, I've now been elected twice. So that's good. I think the two committees I sit on are policy, and Bo and Randy sort of helped me along in that group because that's really not my forte. I'm really a numbers guy. Professionally, I'm a financial advisor. I'm also now chair of the audit committee. That's really where I feel the most comfortable. And I think I bring a perspective from finance that everybody doesn't have on the board. That's it for me.
Thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that. Randy, you're next. Keith, you're on deck.
Well, I have a long history with Portage Public Schools. I started kindergarten at PCEC, and I graduated from Portage Northern with my wife. My daughters went to Portage schools, and right now I have 4 grandsons at Amberley. And my wife retired as a teacher, and a 3rd grade teacher at Haverhill. So I have a long history with the district, and I'm all about the district succeeding, and that means students succeeding. And to quote our former mayor, what's good for the city is good for the schools. And so I'm all about the schools and the community and the students being successful. My contribution to the board is I'm all about governance. Evidence shows that if you have a highly performing board, you typically have highly performing students. And to be highly performing, you've got to have a governance model that's current and a governance model that you follow as a board. And I certainly am interested in keeping a lot of the divisions we see in society off the board, and make sure we stay focused on what's best for kids and not what's best for special interest groups. So, and I just want to add, Kurt, you make a big contribution to the policy committee because you bring a lot of common sense there, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Keith, welcome. I am leaving you last because I figured you had the most experience answering these types of questions with your interview. So congratulations on being selected. I watched your interview. You're very impressive. What contributions you make to the board, I'll let you do that in the future tense if you'd like. Keith.
Okay, that sounds fine. And I think the common thread that goes through all this and the importance to me is really how schools play the role of the anchor of the community in a lot of ways. So for 15 years, I commuted from the Portage area to Oaklawn Hospital in Marshall, about a 45-minute commute. And what I realized through that experience, Marshall is a much more contained community, kind of independent on its own. But the two anchors there were healthcare and schools. And a lot of our time, a lot of my time working in the public policy arena there was kind of bringing the two together to make sure that everything was working in harmony, but really for the community, to make Marshall a stronger community. So I see that working very much the same way in Portage. Excellent schools, excellent healthcare really make for an important anchor for the community. So, so to me, that's what's important. And as far as contributions, I mean, I guess there are some coming and some going. So in my role heading up the Home Builders Association, I came to realize through that how no community-based organization works as an island, that everything is interwoven, the power of networking, the power of bringing everything together that can really make a difference. So I hope that I can bring that. I've got experience working with boards, so that's fresh in my mind as well. And then I guess finally, the fact that my kids are not too far removed, 4 of them, from Portage Public Schools gives me a fresh approach. So those are my contributions coming and moving forward.
Thank you, Keith. I thought it was a great idea on Randy's part to do this because I've just learned from my 6 years of working with the board kind of what some of the answers to these questions are, because you see it just naturally come out in the conversations that we have. So Keith, I hope it was helpful to maybe get a little bit of insight into kind of the perspectives that you're going to have around the board table with you. Just real briefly to introduce myself, my name is Gary Gashenski. I'm with Perspectives Consulting. I've had the privilege of working with Portage Public Schools since 1997. I first worked with the board in 2013 and have been actively leading your policy governance retreats since 2015. My professional experience and background includes policy governance. I would not say that I am the definitive expert on it, but I do like to be the umpire and referee when necessary and keep things within the lines. I think there's an awful lot of nuance to policy governance that sometimes can go unchecked, and I try to be that little check when we're having the conversations. To Randy's point about fine governance, Portage Public Schools is by far one of the best examples of policy governance in action in a school system, not only in the state, but across the country. And I say that without bias and without prejudice, because in my experience in working with others, you guys are miles ahead. Having said that, pleasure to be with you again today. Let's pick up today's conversation with the second item on the agenda. I'm going to scoot the screen forward here, and we're going to look at some social media bylaws that are coming back. This was a conversation that we had at the November Policy Governance Board retreat. We basically had a brief conversation that said, you know, when we look at our policies, we're probably not up-to-date committee. So I'm going to let Randy or his designee from the policy committee talk to you about what's there. There are 3 policies in particular we're going to look at in terms of edits. So Randy or whomever from the policy committee, do you just want to bring us up to speed on where you went with these policies?
Yes, we reviewed policies, social media policies from other districts that Gary talked about. We looked at Corvallis, North Hills, Iberville, Toms River, and the Texas Association of School Boards. And our committee met, and we reviewed those policies from those other districts, and also took a look at all the current references we had to social media that was found in our bylaws. So as a result of that, we came up with about 8 things that we thought should be included in a social media policy, and it involved
Date there in the work of the policy committee on that. We're looking at 143.1, the public expression of board members, the complete elimination of the previous paragraph B. If you don't have a memory of what paragraph A was types of routine board communication, things like thank you letters and acknowledgments and that kind of thing. Had nothing to do with electronic media in any way, shape, or form. And so we have a B, and we have 7 points underneath B. Is there any discussion about the 143.1 and the proposed additional language there replacing the previous B?
Hey, Gary Bo here. I mean, nothing huge to add, except, I mean, I think what's here now is just more practical, common sense stuff, keeping us safe stuff. I actually don't see trustees today crossing lines on this. I mean, just to make a note here, I mean, if I can apply this logic, I think one reason why we've gotten pretty good at policy governance is because 4 times a year we have retreats where we talk about it. And it's like talk therapy. It's like, you know, you kind of, you know, we never drift too far from it, because we're every 3 months we're kind of drawn back and doing it. So I think, you know, these are the kinds of things maybe every year or so it might be good. Or if we have an instance where maybe we're kind of touching the line on some of these in the future, maybe we pull them back and just spend 10 or 15 minutes on them in a future retreat. But these are things that I really hadn't thought about in probably 5 or 6 years, but it's kind of like, it's just good stuff to remain acquainted with.
there any other thoughts on the proposed revisions to 143.1?
I just want to add that policy committee thought that this bylaw, public expression of board members, was where the meat of the social media policy belonged, as opposed to the other two bylaws we're going to look at next.
I just want to say, I think all of these things are things that we know, but it's important that it's written down. And I think, as Gary always says, we all understand it, but that doesn't mean people a few years down the road are going to understand it unless we write it down and make it clear. So I think this is very clear, and good job. And I'm all for this, especially because of all the contentious stuff that's gone on more recently in government and the public eye. It's just good to remind ourselves of all these things.
Guys, I just had a quick comment. You know, this past fall during the election, you know, I'd had a couple comments regarding, you know, some groups that kind of I felt slighted the board. Would that be a violation of this? You know, because I kind of posted on Facebook how I felt. Actually, it was kind of a celebration, but well, I posted as a celebration. Would that be a violation of this policy, Randy?
Let me think.
You know, I mean, it was clearly my opinion. It didn't really involve the district, so I just, you know, I kind of.
And you clarified that in your communications.
Yeah. Okay. You know, we'll just have to be careful, and I think I was thoughtful when I did that, but I will continue to be thoughtful.
Well, I think, you know, 5 and 6, you know, might be up for interpretation there.
Yeah.
Or at least 5. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Randy.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on 143.1? There are 2 additional policies, as Randy indicated, that are bylaws. Is 167.5, the use of electronic mail and text messages. And you'll note the edits to 167.5 are purely to add text messages to the places where emails were indicated solely previously. And then we have 167.6, use of social media. And the first sentence stands, and then the second part is the new part: a board member's personal and private use of social media may have unintended or negative consequences for the board member and or the district, including possible violations of the Open Meeting Act. Issues related to creation of public record posting social media should be done in matters sensitive to board members' responsibilities. Applicable district policies and legal obligations refer to bylaw 143.1. So as Randy said, the meat of your social media policy has landed in bylaw 143.1. Is there any thoughts or concerns or questions about 167.5 and 167.6?
I just want to point out a couple of things. Adding text messages to 167.5 was a suggestion from Mark, because the Open Meetings Act now refers to text messages, and we had nothing in our bylaws about that, so we thought it appropriate to add it there. And then in the social media 167.6, there was just one sentence there before that just said, you know, you won't conduct any form of board business over social media. And so we thought it important to keep at least this introductory paragraph there, because when you go to the bylaws to look for social media, this is where you go. And if we didn't have that in there altogether, it would be tucked in 143.1 and you might not find it. So that's why the reference to the earlier policy in 167.6. That's how things ended up where they did.
Any other thoughts on the revisions to either of these 2 bylaws? Seeing no other thoughts at this point, I would propose then your next step would be to adopt this at your next convenient board meeting to do that. I am going to bring up that you do have one more policy in your governance policies. It's a policy in the section related to governance policies 3.11. And I note that we did not revisit that one. And I will just point out that that one may need a little bit of the finessing that you did to these two policies here. I need to, just for those of you who weren't on in the November board retreat, the reason I brought this forward was not because there was an issue. It was just trying to be proactive and recognizing what had been some instances of board members from school boards getting in trouble with their use of social media, including a district or two in Michigan. Not this one, luckily, but as said before, this is all stuff you know and is not an issue right now, but good to get codified so there isn't a concern there. So having said that, that is the information that we needed to look at related to the agenda item for the social media bylaw revisions. And having said that, I would move on to our next topic. And our next topic is going to be looking at ends development. This is a page that, as we know from every policy governance retreat, I think to Bo's credit, we don't get off of this page more than one meeting a year. We're normally on this page for something, whether or not it's 1-1 or not. But I know with affection, Bo, that you call us back to it. As well, we should. What's really important when we look at this page, because it's, I would consider the most important page of the governance policies for your school district. We have several elements on it. We have our mission, we have our vision, we have what's called a global end statement, and then we have 5 ends that are listed there. Part of the conversation that we are going to address tonight was sent to you ahead of time. I believe Randy sent you the questions that I want to wrestle with a little bit here, because once again, as I told you, I've been working with you since 2015. We have touched these end statements every single year. We have touched these end statements sometimes more than once in a year. We have touched the same end statement every single year, meaning 1-1. But we've got a situation where we have really kind of massaged what we have, for lack of a better word. We actually worked on the mission and the vision statement all the way back in 2013-14, and we started working on the end statements really actively in 2015. And so we've been working on that for some period of time. What I want to do is just real quickly, in like 90 seconds, just reset the stage for what we're really talking about with ends. Quoting John Carver, who I will accept as the authority in policy governance, John Carver would say that the ends are what the organization produces to fulfill the mission and vision. So we can call them results, we can call them outcomes, but if you think about it, the idea of a factory, it's what the factory produces. In this case, our ends are what Portage Public Schools produce. There are results, there are outcomes. There's 3 things that we need to have with ends. The first thing we have to have is we have to have some kind of organizational purpose being recognized there. Are we answering a question about why we exist? Or are we answering a question about what are our results? Or are we answering a question about who gets what? But it's really a question of existentialism. Why are we here as an organization? And so we have to convey that organizational purpose within the end statement. The second thing is it should be measurable. We should clearly have results that are in some way, shape, or form accessible. As you know from policy governance, what we're really saying here is that as board members, you are saying to administration, this is what we expect to accomplish. And how are we going to know we've accomplished it? Well, the administration is going to report back to you in your monitoring report. And it's really helpful if there's some way that there can be some assessment of that happening. Measure can be done in many different ways, as you know from your monitoring reports. Finally, are desired by owners. Is what we are saying on the end statement a reflection of what our owners want? And as you think about policy governance, owners has a specific meaning. It's the people who are, for lack of a better word, you're their trustees. So our owners for Portage Public School are our community members. They can be our businesses. They can be some of the other organizations in our community that are paying taxes. They're our owners, as well as the typical populations, which we always think about, which are our students and our staff and our employees and our teachers. But the reality of it is we need to be able to say, is it desirable? Is what we're doing desirable? And so that's our brief recap on there. Here's discussion topic number 1. For the past couple of years, once again, since 2015 that I've worked with you, and perhaps before, the board has updated and refined the same 5 end statements, 1.1 through 1.5. We've wordsmithed them, for lack of a better word. We've changed their meanings and their intents. We've tried to modify some of the things we expected out of them over the course of 5 years, but we've never added or removed any of these statements. We've just had 5 end statements. Having said that, the reason we're calling this to question right now is we're dealing with equity, and we're going to talk about equity in a minute. But the reality of it is that are we trying to fit equity into one of these end statements? Should we reconsider something else in terms of either a restatement of our ends, or do we want to revisit the idea of restructuring our end statements completely? Or do we say, no, we're still comfortable with what we have, and let's figure out how we work with these 5 end statements? That's the opener conversation that I asked you to think about, and I will turn the floor over to whoever wants to respond to that question there. But how do we feel about the 5 end statements in terms of continuing to modify and tweak in a good way what we have, or look at a restructuring or restating?
Okay, Gary, I'll break the ice. I think you posed a really good question. I don't have a clear answer for it. I think we ought to wrestle with it. The one thing I feel strongly about is I don't think these statements should proliferate. I think my sense is less is more. And that I'm not saying I'm putting a cap on the number of statements, but I just, when everything's important, nothing's important. Hey, and then my teeny little tweak, and I almost said this in our November retreat, but we got talking about other bigger and more important things. We've chosen to label these 1.1 through 1.5. I think actually these statements should be 1.1 through 1.4. And then the last statement should be 2.1, because that last statement deals with a totally different, in my mind. And I'm not suggesting this is some debate point for tonight. But that 5th one is really different. But that's just an aside. I mean, my big thing is that we just don't start proliferating these. And I'll be quiet, and I want to think more, and I want to listen to others. Because your question, I do not know what the right answer is on, sprinkling, sprinkling, say, equity throughout these versus having an equity statement. I'm not sure what the right answer is.
Gary, would you go back to the slide that has the statements on it?
I'm personally not seeing a way
Brooklyn,
that
come here.
we add equity to these statements that we have. Maybe you can illustrate to us, Gary, how that might happen versus creating an equity policy of its own. the statements appear to be equitable to me, but maybe I'm missing something altogether.
There are definitely different ways to incorporate equity. I don't mean that to be the sole reason for this question. In other words, the larger reason for this question might be more to, I think, I'm going to attribute it to Rusty, who at the previous retreat said, we used to have X number of goals at our company and we narrowed it down to 3. I hope I'm doing you justice here, Rusty. And the 3 has really helped us because now we have some focus to it. And then Bo really brought the same point back again. So I'm probably less concerned that we couldn't fit or should fit equity, and more concerned when we look at the end statements. If we're comfortable with the 5, then let's figure out how to make equity work. If we think we need to revisit it, and it might not be today's conversation, let's revisit it.
Well, were you thinking that number 5 would more appropriately be some sort of owner linkage type of a statement that would pertain to that versus be a part of our main ones?
No. And I'm actually not challenging it being an ends. I just wanted to note that one is really a different beast.
It's a different beast, but I think that we're talking about the district building a culture of collaboration and service, but to me, it's also saying we're trying to build that commitment in our students. Maybe that's not clear there.
I think that's a good point because the monitoring report would reflect what you're saying, Terry.
I agree. I was thinking about that we talk about who uses our buildings and those kinds of things versus talking about building an identity for our kids of collaborating and serving their community. Those are 2 very different things.
Well, can I, guys, I'm looking at our mission statement and our global end statement, and it's about students. And the service to the community is not about students. It's about what the district is doing for the community. But either we have to change our global end statement so we can include service to the community, not just students, or maybe even change our whole mission to be more community-based than student-based. But the service to community doesn't really match our global ends. It's just my brief opinion on that.
Unless we're talking about students doing service.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that's what that meant. We're building
I don't think it did.
Yeah.
I don't think it did either.
I think it was more about the district getting involved in the, collaborating with the community, kind of like we're doing with the library, say, and certain groups. I think it's just reaching out, but I still don't see how that kind of goes in with our global end statement.
And that was the reason for my question to Bo. Were you thinking that could go somewhere else? I thought I heard you say that in your first comments.
Yeah, I wasn't on that wavelength at all. It is interesting though, if you start to look at 1.5 as kind of helping students kind of build their appreciation of service to the community, it starts to bridge into 1.4 in my mind. Although, those can, they can all overlap to a degree, but I did not say that to open a big discussion on that point. But so kind of looping back, kind of Terry, where you opened up on this, what popped into my head is it's hard for me to wrestle with Gary's question as kind of a high level question. And I think my brain, I would say this, is if we had a discussion or a series discussions as to what some options might be, then my brain might be able to shake it out and kind of reverse engineer a position to your question. But I'm just struggling with your big question, just kind of sitting here. I mean, it's the answer just is not clear to me. But I think it's a really good question.
Well, I had a couple of things. The statement that is right above the end says that the following end statement are listed in priority order, but collectively all the end statements contribute to a successful graduate of Portage Public Schools. So my question is that statement priority order, is that valid? I think that was valid back before Mark came, when our end statement basically dealt with whether the activity is curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular. That was sort of the priority, that you would finance or budget those things. And it seems like priority order isn't the right statement there. And the other evidence I have for that is, we just had that presentation on social emotional learning, and those two presenters actually showed a slide of our end statements, and they talked about how all those end statements are interdependent on one another. I mean, you wouldn't take any of those away because they all contribute to the academic success of the student. So I don't know if a better way to word that would be that the end statements are our primary focus is academic success, but collectively all the end statements contribute to a successful graduate of Portage Public Schools based on the fact they're all interconnected. The other thing is, I think Carver's pretty clear that if you have any more than a handful of end statements for any organization, you start to get into means. And it seems like one of the options would be to develop an ends policy for equity. And it seems like if we didn't prioritize the policies, but rather said they were all interdependent, that equity wouldn't get slighted no matter where we put it in order. So just some thoughts.
All good thoughts, I would say.
Hey, so Randy, just building on that, I mean, I see the whole equity piece. I mean, I see those. I used to really think that 1.1 was the most important, and then the others were, you could debate more. But with you raising that point and with the discussions we've had over the years, 1.1 through 1.4, I think they're more equal in my mind. And maybe that's, I don't know, just a maturation of my thinking over the years. But I would want kids, I'd want my kids to have something going on in all of those four. And it's not like, you could set one aside to benefit the others. They're all really important. So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that point. The other thing is, if the other way we might be able to do it, say if we wanted the concept of equity to cascade across these, would there be a way to embed it somehow in the statements that come above those four, where it says global ends or ends up there, and then kind of have it cascade down? That's a brainstorm. I don't know, when push came to shove, if we'd be able to work it out. But that would be another way, as as opposed to having to embed it in each one, which just seems like we're starting to create a legal document, with lots more words in it and kind of created by committee, and it gets to a point where it's hard to read or understand. Anyway, I'm rambling some thoughts.
Hey, don't we deal with equity in our mission statement when we say to educate all students to achieve their potential? I mean, we start right off the bat with that, right? And that's in the mission statement. First thing we talk about is that. I mean, I don't know if you want to change the wording or whatever, but I mean, if that's really, I mean, if you want to flush it out, what you're going to do, maybe obviously you need an ends for that, but don't we deal with that right off the bat in the mission statement?
I think you could say that we do in the vision statement as well. We say we're committed to all.
So then can I now raise a point that pushes back against what I said 5 minutes ago and kind of pushes back against Kurt's logic? Because I mean, Kurt, you're right. It does. It has it there. The problem is Mark does not issue a monitoring report every year for the global end statement or on the vision. And so anyway, just keeping that kind of practical thing in mind.
No, well, I think that's important. And I think it's important to our owners. If they're looking at this, it isn't obvious that equity is there. I think it needs to be obvious.
So
I'd like to move us off of top dead center on this question. The question, once again, that I posed was the one that basically said, do we look at these statements and continue to evolve what we've had, or do we restructure or restate the statements? And I've not heard anybody say yet, we need to restructure or restate. The closest we got was both saying, okay, I'm not sure exactly where I fall on this question. I guess I'd be more concerned if you said, I'm not comfortable with them the way they are and we need to reinvent the wheel. Then I would want to go in a different direction. But nobody has articulated that to me yet. So I don't have to beat this up, but I'm just saying that's what I'm hearing.
So Gary, it's Rusty. I don't think we want to reinvent the wheel, but I think we maybe should reinvent the wheel. I mean, it's not something I think we want to wade into. It's a lot of work. I mean, but that's not to say we don't want to. I really would do. I mean, I'm looking at this right now. Academic success. Well, that's the core curriculum. That's it. That's just the basic. And then the other three items kind of can mesh together, though, the learning leadership skills. But even that, we say we're going to do it. You know, we're going to teach critical thinking and creativity. Well, gosh, we have critical thinkers, we have creative thinkers, but I don't know if we can do both. You know, I think that in responsible citizens, some of that stuff comes naturally. So yeah, can we turn this stuff upside down? But I believe less is more. I went from 5 core values to 3. Yeah, and it took a year for us to really flush it out and figure out what we were doing, but it's a lot better, and it's a lot better definition. It's stuff that we're already doing, but it's a great communication piece. And I think a lot of this stuff was automatically happening at Portage schools. We're just trying to create clarity on what's going on so we can stay focused. But yeah, even for the board to focus on all this stuff is pretty hard.
I would say, though, that from those job things that Randy sent us about employers and what they're looking for, critical thinking is huge. And critical thinking has been being talked about for a decade or more in our schools, that is what kids need to learn how to do, is think critically and solve problems. To be able to do that in the workplace, to be able to do that in the community. I think that needs to be a front and center thing, not just say, oh, it happens naturally, and so we don't need it there. That's my opinion.
Okay, I have just a couple of things to say. Oh, go on, Randy. Oh, okay. Okay, my only comment is I'm very comfortable with the statements. I think where I find some difficulty is what we do to show that we're doing those things. I think that's where my uncomfortability comes in. For example, like with 1.4, when we say, you know, some teachers, some buildings do Black History Month or Women's Studies Month and those kind, I don't think that that's representative of the district. I think that's representative of a few people doing some of those things. So if we're going to put it in here as a district-wide thing, I think we need to really make sure that those things that we list, those things that we include to support those end statements need to be district-wide. Just a thought.
Hey, Celeste, so I just have to fit this in because as you were saying this, this is maybe a slight frustration that I have with our governance model. And that is, I don't feel like it necessarily drives change. And I wish it could. And so when I heard you saying that, what appeared to my mind is that, you know, these end statements would actually drive, somebody would notice that we're doing certain things in certain buildings, but we need to drive that change into all buildings. So that's just kind of an aside. But as I look at these, it's kind of like, you know, how can we get our arms around these end statements and phrase them so they're kind of driving us forward a bit?
Well, as you know, when we, you know, our mission is with all students. So if we keep that as our target, we've got to make sure it happens with all students, not some buildings, some teachers, some, not that. It's not what we're here for. So when we say all students, we've got to be able to wrap our arms around the fact that our end statements has to, as the best as we can, impact all students.
So where the equal comes in is I keep, you know, because we say we're going to do this, you know, all students are going to have this and all students, but I mean, really, we don't have control over that. You know, if some kids just choose not to engage, well, then we're not hitting all. But you know, we need to provide an equal opportunity that's equitable throughout the district for kids to be critical thinkers. We can't force kids to be critical thinkers, but we can provide them opportunities and we can throw that in front of them and do our best. But I think it just still comes down to, you know, kids have opportunities. They can choose to take them or not. But it also involves encouragement. And, you know, encouragement's a big thing, you know, and I said that in my statement earlier is, you know, providing encouragement, because that's huge. You're not going to get critical thinking unless someone's truly encouraging staff to engage for the critical thinking. But, you know, I think it just, the equitable piece comes in when we talk about everybody has an equal opportunity. And if certain areas are teaching really cool stuff and other areas, other buildings aren't, then that's not equitable, and there's not an equitable opportunity.
But Rusty, you could say that you also provide an opportunity for students to learn, and it's up to them whether they do it or not, which really is not what we're striving for. So we need our passionate teachers to motivate and encourage those kids to learn, because as Celeste said, that's our future. And that's their future too. So if they have these other skills, that's going to increase their success in the future.
And also, like for example, with 1.2, when we received a letter from the group of students from Central High School, the Jedi, that is exactly, that's what you do. You plant a seed and they take it from there. Clearly, those students want to see a change in Portage Public Schools.
Yeah.
And we have got to listen to those young voices that will make a huge difference in how we proceed as far as their future is concerned. So, you know, they are inheriting a future that we pretty much created. And it looks like some students get it and some students want to see a change. And I applaud that group for being critical thinkers, thinking outside of the box, going against the grain, going against the norm, and trying something different to make, and again, not just our community, but these kids, I see them impacting the world.
So then I think also you had made the comment earlier, Celeste, that, building by building, is it being emphasized in the same way? Are all the opportunities being there?
Yeah, exactly.
The Jedi group is impressive. My takeaway from that is, like any initiative that really gets rolling, that somebody with charisma
Mm-hmm.
caught fire with this and ran with it. So, what can be done to look at how that took fire and apply it district-wide? But yeah, they deserve to be paid attention to. That was impressive.
I agree, and I think the way we show our support as a board, because we govern through our policies, is to do something with equity in our policies.
Okay, so I have another thought. This is not necessarily linear. But Celeste, when you were talking and you were making a point, and I forget how you phrased it, but it was about kind of what you're wrestling with is how we're shown the results on these things. And when you said that, what clicked in my brain was when we get the results, what I want to see are the crosstabs. And, there's only one result that we get every year. There's only one ends that we get the crosstabs on, and it's 1.1. And I think you all know that there is a statistic about a certain, about African-American students and how they score in our district compared to our peer districts that kind of look like us, are very much like us. And overall, we compare really well with those peer districts, but for African-American students, it's a much humbler story. And so anyway, I just wanted to underscore, we do have an opportunity there. And as you said that, it's like, it's in the crosstabs. And it gets us back to this equity point. And I just want us to figure out a way that through our policies, we can articulate us being a champion for results for each kind of like key crosstab group. I know that was not linear, but I'm doing these discussions, Keith, these discussions get messy, and then Gary helps us to sweep it up, and we take it to policy, and sometimes it takes a year.
Well, there's pressure on me. I'm noting the time at 5:06 right now. I'm going to propose with the comment that Bo just shared there that we take let's go for a 14-minute break here, and we'll reconvene at 5:20. And we will be right in the same topic. We're on ends all the way through till about 6:15 today. So I will see all of you back in about 14 minutes. Randy, I was going to hold for about 90 seconds and see if we get Keith and Rusty back with us.
Okay, I'm just glad I can hear you. I was concerned.
Okay.
No, this is Keith. I'm here.
Okay, very good. We're all back again. Wonderful. I took the opportunity of 14 minutes of time to think about what I've heard you wrestling with, and I'm going to attempt to summarize it in 4 broad points because I would like to keep our conversation moving forward today. The 4 things I've heard, the first thing is that there is some concern about end 1.5 and does what 1.5 say versus what we are monitoring versus what we intended actually align, and if a reasonable person was to look at 1.5, would they read into it what we intend? So there's some concern there. The second concern is the idea of prioritization. You know, is 1.5 really 2.0, or do we take off the numbering and we say they're all basically equal, etc.? So there's a concern about prioritization. The third thing is this idea of all and what all is, especially when it comes down to the idea that we're saying all, but yet some of our monitoring maybe isn't all. It's examples of things that are happening in the district versus district-wide performance or versus uniformity of offering. And the fourth thing I've heard is the idea that while we have a vision and we have a global end statement, we don't measure either one of those. So if we have something in those spaces that we want to have measured, like all, because if you note, all occurs in our mission, all occurs in our vision, all occurs in our global end statement, but it doesn't occur below that. And if we think that's something we want to measure, either we've got one of 2 options. We either need to look at reconstituting where all appears in our order, or put it in the end versus in the global end, or we need to reconsider, is the global end something we should be monitoring as such? Maybe we don't need a global end. We just need something that says those things. Those are the things I heard you say. I hope that's a fair compilation of the concerns that you've had so far. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to move the conversation forward to this second question, which I know, Bo, you had jumped the shark for me and got me there and didn't even realize it. But this is probably your mantra, if there ever was one. Should the district's end statements drive what the administration does? In other words, is it our goal to write end statements that are motivators, that are, this is what we want to try to achieve? I think I know the answer to this, but I just like your affirmation or not with this statement. Do we want them to drive what administration does? Do we want them to be a motivator or not?
I think we want them to drive what administration does as a high level. At a high level, I don't believe we can drive everything administration does, but we can certainly have ends that drive the reasons the district exists.
I'll go back to it. Just when I look at some of the stuff is it creates clarity. I mean, most of the stuff is going on, but I think the whole clarity piece, you know, it helps keep you grounded all the time, so you can always point to something while we're doing something. You know, so you know, it's all to me, it's all about clarity.
Just a comment. Earlier, I mentioned that, you know, we have, for example, in some teachers in some buildings. I've been with the district long enough to know that once upon a time, every building did Black History Month, for an example. And administrators had to submit a report on what that looked like. Now, I remember it with Rickers, I remember it with McFarland, but after that, I don't think we did it anymore. We didn't have to complete the reports. So and you know, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done sometimes. And so because we didn't have to turn in any reports, it just kind of wasn't that important anymore. It wasn't done anymore. It wasn't a consistent district-wide thing anymore. So I'm just throwing that out there, that it's not like it's something that can't be done or shouldn't be done or hasn't been done. It has been. There were full reports. In fact, this past weekend I was getting rid of all, old stuff that I've had around, and I found a report, and it was quite interesting how we incorporated that in math, and how we incorporated it in science and in PE and all those different curricular areas. So I'm just saying that if we're going to say all, it can't be some buildings, some teachers. It has to be a genuine effort for all. That was my concern. In fact, Randy, Deb might remember some of that. She was around when all of that was going on, so she may have
Right.
some remembrance of how she incorporated into her third grade class, because we all had to do it, every building.
Well, she hasn't thrown anything away. Her entire classroom is in our garage.
I understand. I came across some gift cards from when I was teaching, and the businesses, restaurants no longer exist. So I understand. I understand, Deb, totally.
I'd like to put my car in there, particularly in the winter.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on whether the unstatement should drive what the administration does, or whether they should be a motivator?
As I recall, when we were putting together our mission and vision statements, so that would have been back in 2014 when I very first joined the board, there was a question that was posed, and it was, should our mission and vision be internal statements, or should they be external statements? And I remember having a discussion about that. And as I recall, what we decided is that they were internal statements. So to me, that says all of this is supposed to be a motivator. That's just what I took away.
And Gary, I'll offer some thoughts. I think we've talked about this before, but end statements are not goals. They're or they're not, hard and fast goals per se. But I guess just reflecting on this is, and just in any kind of governance organizational setting, it's if you have these in place and the CEO has to come back and report on them every year, then I think to a default, there's going to be some sense of motivation, is that the CEO would not want to come and make a presentation that would embarrass him or her. And so I think the default is that they are a motivator regardless. And my total bias would be, can we embed these things so that they certainly are a motivator? And without being, and walking this line between setting the bar higher, but not being unreasonable about it. And understanding that institutions and institutional results take time, and patience, and sticking to it. But I guess my rhetorical question, if these end statements weren't a motivator to someone, what's the bother? And there may be a good answer to that question, but my brain is stuck. My brain would be stuck on that. So anyway, once again, you have a nice way of posing these questions that don't have necessarily easy answers.
Yes, it's the secret to why I've been working with you for 6 years, is I pose the unanswerable question. let's move forward with the idea that we recognize that there's some motivation there, and I want to move all the way up to the equity part of the conversation, because we've already talked about equity a little bit, and I think we need to talk about it in a much more significant way. Once again, going back to the November policy governance retreat. At the November policy governance retreat, we had talked about and had a presentation about update on your efforts in this space, and the decision was made to once again refer this to policy committee to take a look at this. And so what is on the screen right now is, I think, probably best explained, or at least gone over by either Randy or a member of policy committee. There's two questions there. The first one is, what should we include in our equity policy? And the second one is, should we include equity in two very specific executive limitation policies? So Randy or your designee, do you want to just bring everybody up to speed to how we got to what's there, and then we can have a conversation.
District used it in an executive limitation kind of way. Charlotte Mecklenburg had a 3-page detailed policy, and Ferndale went so far as to pass a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. So the three of us on policy committee favored the Burlington approach, was a global end statement and one end statement or some variation of that. And we thought that maybe a tweak to our global end statement and or a new end statement would be just the ticket. So we agreed that the next step was to come to this meeting and determine what might be included in an equity policy, and then wrestle with where that might go.
Thank you, Randy, for the recap. So the question to the group then is, what is it that we should be including in the equity policy? And we have some points that have been suggested as possibilities, I believe, from the policy committee's work there. So what's the thoughts here? Where do we need to go with our equity policy?
Excuse me, is it just me, or does it seem like we're just talking about equity in isolation? And I say that because, yes, we're working with Great Lakes Equity Center. Yes, we have hired equity, inclusion, diversity coordinator. Yes, we have students who are interested in JEDI and that kind of thing. And yes, we're talking about students with social emotional learning. And it just seems like all of those things are so intertwined, but we talk about them in isolation. Maybe it's just me. When we talk about SEL, it's about SEL. When we talk about diversity coordinator, we talk about the diversity coordinator. But if we're working in harmony some kind of way, if we're just kind of pulling this all together, it won't feel so disjointed. It feels like the natural thing to do. I just see us talking about very important issues in isolation. And maybe it's just the way it's interpreting it, or maybe it's just how it's coming across to me. But we talk about, embracing diversity, we talk about inclusion, and we hire a coordinator, and then it just seems so, yet we still talk about it. We keep talking about it. And I'm not sure what that means, or what keeps blocking us from, I don't know, making it. I would just like to see it be very orchestrated. Just kind of like it just flows, because we do this and we do that, and it kind of works together, and it all fits, and it makes sense, and it's the right thing to do. So I just see us talking about some very important issues in isolation, which gives them no strength.
I can understand why you would think that, and I think that's why it's important to fold that into policy somewhere, so it becomes part of the outcomes we have for the district. remember back in November, Mark asked for a resolution from the board supporting it. And we thought the better way to handle it was to do something with equity and policy so it's included with the way the entire district operates. So I understand your point.
And I remember when, when we were talking about the coordinator, which was at our last meeting, and I remember Kirk saying, well, if it's this important, how can we really do what we need to do with a part-time person in this position? So I think we're there. I'm just not sure how we articulate it. I think we're shooting for the same thing. It's just that how do we make it happen?
Celeste, I think some of it is equity is different to different people. And, if you have a special ed kid, equity is different than if you're African American or if you're, Asian or, Native American or whatever other place you come. So it's such a broad and diverse topic that it's hard to even put a policy, for Randy's sake, that will meet all and everybody's expectations, because it means different things to different people.
Yeah, and that's true. But then, as Bo brought up, when we start looking at the data and we see specific groups that are not performing at the same level, again, I don't know. It just seems like there should be something that we can do that kind of supports all of that we're trying to see, because we can, as a district, we can't continually see specific groups not performing. For us to be, we can't just say that, we're for all kids, but yet these kids, we'll let them slide. And we've got to do our best to make it happen at least for opportunities. So I get it with the equity. I totally get it, because even with equity, and you're looking at the school student data, it will include students who have IEPs and students without IEPs, and so we talk about all of those subgroups. So
Right, and we don't, as far as we don't break out free and reduced lunch people, and we don't judge, all different groups. There are all kinds of different subsets in our group, and it's hard to, from the equity part of view, to get them all on the same page. And I don't know the answer, Celeste, by any means, but I look at it, it's, depending on where you're coming from, everybody has different wants, and it's a very hard thing to put our hands around.
But when we do report out data, we do include students who are indicated in free and reduced. So we do include that student data too. And that's why I've always asked, when we look at our gifted programs, when we looked at our Language Arts Plus, when we look at our IB, how many representations of our subgroups are in those high level academic groups? What do we do to encourage it? How do we open up that opportunity? How do we make it happen? So yeah. And it's just where we are right now. We just need to kind of figure that out. And I know there's an answer. It's just, how do we know? How do we get there?
So Celeste, you said what I said earlier. You said, what do we do to encourage it? How do we get more people in the IB program, a more diverse group of people? I see equity and diversity as teaching diversity and things as being slightly different, but yeah, how do we encourage? Because we can't provide equity unless there's encouragement, and there's opportunity. We're providing opportunity, which is equitable, but that encouragement, everybody has that opportunity, but how do we get them there? How do we encourage them? How do we engage them? It comes down to engaging kids, empowering kids, and encouraging kids. Engaging, empowerment, and encouragement.
I totally agree. I often think of educators as being, if we could model athletic coaches, we'd be on top of the world. Because a coach who sees a 6'5" freshmen walk into the building is going to motivate, encourage, support. We'll make sure that they talk to their teachers, make sure that they are eligible to play when game time rolls around. That's what coaches do. And you're right, it is a part of encouraging, and it is a part of just giving them that extra boost, because some students will need that, you know, and that's when we talk about our athletes, we have some athletes who struggle and some athletes who have other other things going on, but yet there's somehow the coach is there for them. The coach talks to teachers, talks to parents, talks to administrators, and said, hey, wait, we've got to get this kid on board here. We've got to make sure who has an after school program, who's going to, they have study groups, you know, even at Western with my classes, there are study groups, you know, the football coach has his own study group at 6 o'clock in the morning. You know, what can we do is how do we coach them into being the best that they can be?
This is something that I have seen a lot in my mentorship program. And a lot of it is that many kids do not have a person to advocate for them. Mm-hmm. Their parents don't. They aren't able, they don't know how, they don't care. They're too busy trying to work 2 jobs to put food on the table and a roof over their heads. So these kids are not getting encouragement at home. They're not getting encouragement, period. And I can just share a brief story that last year I asked my student if her parent was going to parent-teacher conferences. And she said, oh no, my parents never go to conferences. And I said, well, conferences are really a good thing, because not only is your name put before the teacher, but a face is put with a name. There's someone that's interested in what you're doing, and they're kind of a partner with your teachers to make sure that you succeed. Would you like me to go to conferences with you or for you? And first she said no. And then we sat there for the hour. And at the end of the hour, she said, sure, you can go to conferences with me or for me if you would like. So I did that. And some of the feedback I got back was actually very good. And some of it was not so good. But for me to be able to go back and share that with that student and give her a pat on the back for what she was doing right, and then encourage her about what she needed to work on, was so valuable. So that's what we need for every kid, but how do we make that happen? That's the difficulty. We can't have a mentor for every kid, and it really is our kids' parents' jobs to encourage them, but not all of them are fortunate enough to have parents that can and do that. So that's another obstacle to equity. We can't change what's going on at home.
The challenge that I've laid before you is the idea of how do you want to address the topic of equity within policy. And I completely accept and appreciate all of the concerns that have been shared so far and the anecdotes that you've shared. The question I would call you back to would be is there a preference for how we do this? There's some things listed that might be included in the equity policy. How might we approach this? Do we want to include all those things? Where do we want to go with this, such that we are saying this is reflective of what we as a board and as representatives of the larger community want for our schools?
I think Rusty had the key, just from my perspective, about equitable opportunities.
Yeah. So Gary, I'm not sure we're going to get there tonight on this one. but so as I'm listening to this conversation, I mean, something we're just going to struggle with is how to have a conversation about this without immediately going to the means. And that's like the natural thing to do. And I'm doodling on my pad, trying to come up with something that's like ends based, but I'm not doing a perfect job at it. But I mean, this would be the sentiment that I'd like us to figure out how to get in there. And so there's a couple things here, and I think the biggest thing is fight. And this is imperfect, but just fighting to level the playing field for kids who are basically all of their lives have been walking into the wind. And whether that's through, and I wrote down 2 bullets of the ways that I think are the 2 biggest ones out there. And the first one is institutional racism, and the second one is being born into an economically disadvantaged situation. And so it's like, how can, and what I've been hearing from you all in these conversations are conversations about means that kind of get to those things. But how can we embed that sentiment? That's not the right word, but how can we embed that into our ends? And then I noticed at the bottom of the document that you're sharing, you have also including this in treatment of staff. And that's the other angle that I think we need to wrestle with a little more. And so the other angle on this is that our staff at the school looks more like the community that is represented by it. But I am kind of dodging your question, which is, how do we do it? How do we embed this in policy? And my brain just is not there yet. And then Randy, right, I am recalling our conversations about maybe having one on its own in there on this. I think that's fair game. We are adding something then. Do we put it up top in a global, but we don't get reports on that? So that's a problem there. So anyway, I'm not delivering us to a destination with these words. I know.
All good thoughts.
And this is just more brainstorming, is we could just try something. Just say, okay, let's say we are going to have, we could go down 2 paths just as an experiment. And one might be, how might we tie this concept into some or all of our end statements and see what that looked like? And then another approach would be just draft one on its own and see what that looked like, and just stare at them and see if we liked one more than the other, or if somebody came up with a more clever way. Gary, between Gary and Randy, you guys have done research on what some of the other districts have done. And, there's a diversity of approaches to this. Hey, I will say this. I think this is the biggest thing. And this is a cynic's thought here. So remember at our last board meeting when Chris Harris was introduced, and I said I had a question that I wouldn't hit him with in a public board meeting? You know what my question was? What are you going to do when this whole concept is not the sexy new thing anymore? And that's like where I'm coming from on this. It is so the way organizations and societies work is something's hot for a while, and then it cools off and we move on to the next hot thing. And, what can we do as trustees to hardwire this thing in here and be serious about it? And so that in, 2 or 3 years, when this thing kind of cools down, it's in society, we won't let it cool down. We will say, this is important. This was just not the flavor of the month for us. It wasn't the flavor of 2021 for us, but this is an important thing. More thoughts?
No, I think that's why it needs to be an end. And that's why it needs to be an end, so we can monitor it.
Just if we're making it an end, Randy, just to start, the district would make an effort to encourage, engage, and empower kids. it's lots of E's, and maybe that's kind of flashy and memorable. But if we did, I mean, that's what we need to do. You go back to Celeste talking about the coaches. Boy, I see some pretty cool stuff that these coaches do, because they do have a passion for encouraging, engaging kids. But I think it goes beyond their coaching duties. I mean, I admire some of the stuff like Chris Andrews does, and say Ben Neal. You get to witness it, and a lot of Ben's kids come from some harder socioeconomic backgrounds. But I think he's probably gets more enjoyment out of watching these kids grow and become men than watching them score basketball, points in a basketball game. So that's when we talk about this stuff, that's where my brain goes. How do we make more staff members like that? My kids have the benefit of having Matt Cam, so Matt's not a coach, but he's engaging kids, he's empowering kids through stuff, and he gets some tough kids. So when we're talking about this, to get equity, some very specific people are coming to mind that drive some of that.
The reason I revisited what ends were at the beginning of the conversation is that it's important to recognize that perhaps equity isn't a product of the district, but a condition which we wish the district to operate in. If we think about monitoring reports and we think about what it is that we get, we know what the academic success monitoring report looks like. We've already earlier tonight called out some of the other monitoring reports that don't have crosstabs and expressed concerns about them. I think the challenge here with equity is, does equity itself, can we put it into an end statement in a way that is an outcome for the district? Burlington, Vermont, one of the examples which I provided to you previously. Reducing disparities. The difference in academic achievement between the highest achieving and lowest achieving student groups will decrease. In and of itself, I think there is completeness of it, because it is basically saying that we will not accept as a district in Burlington, Vermont, that all students don't succeed at the highest possible levels, and we can measure it, because we're talking about the disparities and measuring those disparities and talking about that. I'm not suggesting this is the right one. I'm just saying, if we're going to go down this path to the flavor of the month conversation, not that these things aren't good that are on the test that I have for you, but just recognizing the challenge here. If we're going to put it in an end statement, because you know what that means. That means we're saying to the administration, prove it. That's where we need to think this to its logical conclusion. I don't have a recommendation for you. I agree with you that there's importance here. I'm just saying, I think you need to be comfortable with A, what it is you ask for, meaning, do you want it to be motivational? Great. And then B, how do you ask it so that you get that, or how do you specify it so you get that you believe is what you want for students, staff, the larger Portage Public Schools community.
Gary, what you said there with that example, we might be able to get there with a tweak to 1.1. Always tweaking 1.1. Or Randy, it might have been a brainstorm that you had at one point, which was, do you have a sub piece to 1.1? And I'm not sure what the right answer is here, but yeah, Gary, I mean, yeah, you asked a good question. I forget what you said, but is equity more of a result driven or what did you say, situational, or I forget what your
I use the word, is it a condition of operation that you expect this condition to exist, that we have equity in what we do?
And I mean, that's a great question. I mean, the answer ultimately may be it's some of both. Gonna have to think about that one. But the piece about the result, I mean, my expectation would be that the crosstabs for some of the kids, the academic results, those test scores for some of these groups, disadvantaged groups, is that we figure out how to raise those who have been have had to walk into a headwind their whole life, that those scores begin to rise up, towards other kids that haven't had to walk into those headwinds. Whatever we do, I think including that somehow is really important. And that would expose a gap. And I mean, I think it would be a very strong thing for us to do, would be to figure out how to state that in policy. I mean, because you're not going to solve that in a year. You're not going to solve it in 5. You can make a good start, but that's a long-term proposition. That's not to say that you can't start doing some important things to impact it in a year.
Once again, the question before you is simply, how do we want to move forward with the equity policy? If you say, that these things are all important, we need to try to encompass all these things, that's fine. If you have something else in mind that you wish to have us go to work on, when I say us, I think that's also a decision you need to make. Is this policy written? Are you kicking it back to policy committee? Are you keeping it for your own? How do you feel about it? Because I really would like to move you forward one step with the conversation today, is to maybe come out of this and say, okay, here's kind of where we want to go. Bo articulated maybe trying it 2 different ways and we see what we like. What's your preference here with moving forward on this? Where would you like to go with your equity policy?
So Gary, kind of going along with what Bo said, trying it 2 different ways, because it's really hard. We just had, we have retreats about 4 times a year, and there's such a big gap that we need to digest stuff, and so we're having all these thoughts thrown at us, and everybody's discussing it, and really we can't process this in a very meaningful way in 90 minutes. That's the big thing for us to make a decision and to be able to process this in a meaningful way. If we want to do a really good job, I just don't know. I just don't think that we can come up with that decision. So like both saying, hey, let's run down 2 different roads and see what's best, kind of alleviates, because I don't want to say we're going to run down one road. I don't think we can make that decision right now.
I'm supportive of that.
Randy, are you supportive of that, in the knowledge that if it goes back to policy committee, you would be able to get your heads around it?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, with Randy saying that, he fully understands that it's more work for Randy. Because I mean, when push comes to shove, Randy is the person who drafts this stuff, and it's much appreciated. But but maybe it's just a couple policy committees where, and I don't know, Randy, if you have stuff drafted coming into them, but maybe it's a couple policy committee meetings where we're just doing more brainstorming on a few of our options here. And then, we, largely you, ends up just crafting some. And then maybe the policy committee beats up the options and we come back by May. And because Rusty, you're right. I mean, we can't do it in 90 minutes. I mean, that's why it takes, a year's worth of these retreats to get our arms around some of this stuff. But I just scribbled down 4 options, and it's just how my brain sorted it. But, add a sub end to 1.1, tweak 1.1, tweak all of our policies to see if we can't figure out a way to fit it into, several of the ends, have our own separate policy. I mean, we could try to do those, and we might quickly find out that some of them are just not going to work, but we're trying something.
No, I'm fine with that. We need to move this down the road.
So I think it'd be great if Gary could maybe capture, or Bo, you can capture what you just said, because I think that's pretty good stuff. And then we can just start thinking about the advantages and disadvantages. Obviously, if you put a whole new policy in, you'd have to punt a few, because I think 5 is too many. So we obviously don't want 6, but I think we need to, if we can just document what you just said, I think that's a great start.
Bo, I think if I heard it correctly, I heard you propose there might be 4 different ways to do it. Create a sub to 1.1 to actually tweak or refine the language of 1.1, to actually look at incorporating it in all of them. And I assume all of them would be 1.1 through 1.4.
Yeah.
And a entirely separate policy, whether it is global or 1.5 or 1.6 or 1.7, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and there may be some other. Yep. Yeah, and instead of debating which of those are the better ones, work on all of them, and then look at the end product, and maybe something will emerge.
The biggest thing here is that I did provide you, and this is back now last year at the retreat, I did provide you with examples of equity policies. And I'm going to bet, Randy, if we were to look again, there'd be more now than there was before. Because when you look at the ones that I provided you, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the dating of them is all probably within the last 2 years. In other words, this is the movement within our society right now that these policies are becoming more prevalent. So there may be more to go there. It doesn't diminish, though, Bo, what you've already said, which is it's going to make more work for the policy committee to create 4 versions of it versus 1 version of it, and then take a look at it. But it's moving the ball forward. The other thing, lest it make any difference, is I have 9 pages of notes from this conversation. So I think there's at least some things that we can pull out of it that might be incorporated in how you pull that language together. Having said that, there's one more thing we wanted to touch on today. We have policy number 1.2. It's an end that we looked at here. And the point here is that there was a discussion at policy committee on this. I'll turn it over to Randy for that, but there's a current on your screen now and a proposed on your screen. Randy, do you want to bring us up to speed on the evolution of this language on 1.2?
Yeah, 2 things that the pandemic really shined a light on was equity and social emotional learning. And the board had a presentation on that at our last meeting. And we have nothing in our policies anywhere about social emotional development. And the thought was maybe we could wrap that into 1.2. And then it was interesting that Mark saw some parallels between social and emotional skills and 21st century skills. And at the same time, K-RESA released the results of their survey of local employers and what they're looking for in terms of learning and leadership skills as it relates to 21st century learning skills. So the thought was maybe 1.2 would be a policy we could tweak and support the social and emotional learning piece. And I imagine, if the board's in support of pursuing that direction, that'd be something that would follow the policy committee to also come up with some drafts and alternatives for how we might address that.
Randy, just to clarify, is it my understanding you want the board today to just look at the proposed language here and say we're okay to move it forward for approval, or are you saying we're on a journey and we're going to tweak it and come back?
No, we're on a journey. We're on a journey. And, once again, we don't want social and emotional learning to become, means like. So we're going to have to work on language to make sure it's ends like. It's just become a really important part of what the district does, and we don't address it anywhere. If the board doesn't think we need to, that's fine, but I put it out there for that.
Yeah, I think we're always evolving, Randy, and getting better. So yeah, I think tweaks are a great idea. I mean, we're getting better and we're evolving, and why would we not? If we can come up with a better statement, better communication.
And one of the interesting ones is self-management. That's what employers in the area were asking for. That was like their number one thing. And self-management is also a social and emotional learning piece. So there's some parallels there.
And as I recall, you stated that was things like showing up on time and those sorts of
Right.
details.
Right.
This looks good to me.
Terry, you said this looks good. You're saying we like that, or we want to keep having that discussion?
I like it, but I'm willing to continue having the discussion.
Yeah, because I think, Randy, you're saying you'd like to have discussion on it for a while, right?
Well, I'd like to know if the board thinks it ought to be something we should, look at putting in policy and present some drafts to the board to get their opinion.
Yeah, I think this is important stuff. I mean, we talk about academic success and even the equity piece, and academic success is important, but boy, you can have really smart, academically successful kids who fail in all the other areas, or you can have kids who fail miserably in the academic portion, and they just are barn burners on the other stuff. And the ones, when you think of successful people, it's not necessarily all the academically ones, and the success is measured in a lot of different ways. But I think a lot of that success goes way beyond the academic portion. So yeah, this stuff is really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think this is an improvement without any detraction from the original, but what stands out to me especially is the self-management component. I think that's a tremendous improvement to have that in.
Are there any concerns with including social emotional? I haven't heard any. I just want to make sure we're comfortable with continuing and finishing this track that we're on. Randy, is that enough guidance then? Because I assume we're going back to policy committee again. So the next step on this one will be back to.
Yeah, I don't think this one would be as much work as equity, and there's already a potential draft of it. So I think we could bat it around in policy committee and come up with something for the board.
Very good. I would be remiss, Mark, I see your smiling face again. Do you have any thoughts or comments, Mark, from an administrative standpoint related to the discussion you've heard tonight on equity or the discussion on social emotional learning?
Boy, I have tons of thoughts, none of which I can turn into comments at this moment. I mean, certainly the discussions the board is having are very important, very complex, very challenging, very similar to many of the conversations we've had as administrative staff around these same topics. You know, trying to find the right place for the board to engage in this conversation, staying in the policy realm, as opposed into the means realm. That's also very challenging. I guess the only thing, just one observation is, in addition to your governance policies, just know that, you still have a whole book of operational policies, and for districts that are not governance or policy governance districts, a lot of this stuff is embedded in operational policy, or what we call operational policy. So I just leave that as an additional avenue to address, in particular, the equity piece. So just didn't want to lose sight of that road if you're talking about taking multiple paths to getting to an end. No pun intended. But just thanks, Gary, for keeping the conversation going.
Yeah, I love policy governance humor. Okay, so with your permission, board members, I'm going to suggest that we go back to the 4 options that Bo proffered and add Mark's 5th option to it, which would be to include it in operational policy as a potential as well, which is a salient point for this, because there are lots of things in operational policy, as you well know. We have gotten ourselves to about 6:15 this evening. Is there anything else that any of you have? I know we've worked our way through the agenda that we talked about that we need to bring up at this point. Not seeing anything, Randy. I'll turn the meeting back over to you. Trustees, it was good to see you all. Keith, welcome, and I'll look forward to being back with you in May.
Well, thanks, Gary, for leading our discussion, and thanks to all trustees for weighing in on all these matters. And with that, we'll adjourn, and we'll see you in about 14 minutes.